Good evening. My name is Elisabeth Lane and I'm the Secretary of Seahorse. Now, for those who are regular, you'd often see Greer sitting here. But did you ever wonder what's her story? And tonight we're going to do that. So I'd like to welcome my guest today. Greer, welcome.
Thank you, Elisabeth. It'll be an interesting challenge.
Yes, it will be different. It's good to be in the power seat for once. So probably my first question to you is, when did you know you were different from everyone else?
My earliest memory of something being different but not understanding it was as a toddler. And I got into Mum's trousseau box in a bedroom and pulled out the pink nightie, and Mum found me. And like all mums, she picked me up and carried me out to Dad's workshop at the back of the house. And like all parents, they had a good bit of a chuckle, oh yeah, look at their little darling. But I just had a sense that this is not what little boys are supposed to be doing, even though I liked it. But after that, you know, like all little kids, you tend not to remember things until a bit older. And so I never really had any sense of being different, apart from, you know, in the end I was the middle of five with two older brothers and two younger brothers. And when I was 5, I ended up being in hospital, in and out for several months because of a measles-related lung problem. And they're my real earliest memories, but then I just sort of felt it was a strange sort of sense of just being, I'm in hospital, I'm out of hospital, I'm in hospital sort of thing. So they're my earliest memories.
So when you went to school, what was that like? Do you remember much feeling different at school?
Not really. I was a tall kid for my age, you know, sort of jumping forward. I was at my full adult height at 16, so the kids grew taller than me. But in primary school, I was one of the taller kids in the class, and I was physically fit and ran. And I loved my athletics, and so I suppose I had a lot happening in my life. You know, I loved my playing cricket and football, and you know, all those sort of school sports and things like that. But it wasn't really until my teenage years that I started to have some inkling that something was different.
Do you remember when it first started?
After we moved from where we originally lived to Ballarat, and I probably in my very early teens, like 13, 14, that I started to sort of think, oh, I'd like to wear that rather than what I'm currently wearing. But at the same time, you know, I loved my I loved having that sense of physical strength, which I think, particularly going through puberty and getting to full adult height, and I was really loved running every week, you know, track and field, cross country, and playing some other sports. So I had that sort of sense of I was able to mask it quite easily.
So no one had any idea at that time?
Absolutely none.
So that would have got you right through school?
Yes, it did, but in those particularly, you know, 16, 17 year age bracket, I used to help out at a swimming pool in Ballarat, which is no longer there. And when, you know, like when you dive in the pool and you get out and you wrap the towel around yourself, I used to fold it carefully in half so it was a mini skirt. It was my concession to being able to wear something that resembled a skirt. We're all big kids, and Mum's 5'3", so there was no female clothes in the house that I could fit into.
How did you handle that feeling? Like you said that you did all the masculine stuff, but how did you handle it? Just the fact that you couldn't express yourself as a child, was it just like one of you just accepted that's the way it was?
One of the things that I did do was I used to sneak buying what we'd euphemistically call stick books and going, oh, I'd like to wear that, rather than looking at who was wearing them. And that was one way of sort of being able to do it. But the thought was always there. You know, I suppose I could get out, go on a training run, and you know, sort of expend a lot of energy.
So you're using sport to basically help not think about those things, would you say that'd be accurate?
To a degree, but also too, I think I have a very pragmatic, I suppose in some ways I was a kid who went with the flow rather than necessarily be the leader or be a total follower. You know, I sort of fitted somewhere in between and had that sense of being able to go into a neutral sort of state of thought process, I suppose.
Okay, you finish school and you start going to work. How was that for you?
Same thing, exciting and new, because as soon as I left school, I was down in Melbourne, beginning of January, and I was got a job with the Federal Public Service and started that first working day in the new year, and lived at the old YMCA at City Road, South Melbourne, where the Arts Centre now is, and so there was always new and exciting things happening. So I never really had a lot of time to seriously think about it. You're meeting new people, friends, some acquaintances, all those sorts of things. Probably latter in that first year, started finally getting around to going to dances and things like that, and just all those normal late teenage things when you first go to work.
So when would you say you first started expressing yourself in your true gender identity?
I met a wonderful woman and we got married, and probably soon after, in those early years of marriage, I had clothes I could sort of sneakily wear, and it's sort of difficult to say that I thought about it in terms of looking at being a true identity or not. It was something that I knew there was this inside me that wanted to, at some point, identify as female, but I think, like a lot of it, there was just too scared to sort of even talk to anyone about it.
So you told no one. How long were you just sitting in that type of state? Do you remember?
Oh, quite a few years, because early years of marriage and working, I went from being a clerk in the public service into what became my main career in a now long superseded part of the old air traffic service system. So by the time you go and do the training course for that and then get posted, and you got on the job training you have to do, and then after a year or so at Tullamarine, I got posted to Darwin in 74, and then to Catherine. So there was always a lot happening, but I remember particularly in those years, I used to sneak getting dressed when my partner wasn't around and trying to hide it, but at some point I did get caught. I think over the next number of years you sort of fold your arms and grit your teeth and go, I can overcome this, because I had no real knowledge of anything other than seeing portrayal on TV in shows, and usually it was in a derogatory fashion.
Would you be happy sharing how, when you got caught, what happened?
Yeah, it was sort of embarrassment, I suppose, and that was where gritting the teeth and sorry about this, I don't really want to do it, but I just have this internal need to get dressed, and it went from there. That sense of embarrassment, I think, was the thing, and sort of being apologetic.
When did you first turn up at Seahorse? Do you remember the night?
I do, and the process of getting there was quite a long time. I had actually seen a reference to Seahorse probably not long after it started, in a small article. I think it was in the Herald, which was the evening newspaper in Melbourne at the time, and it just sort of sat in the back of the mind. It never really occurred to me that I'd ever eventually get to see it, and particularly through the 90s in particular, when the feelings were at the extreme strongest. We had by this stage we had a package from my original career, and we had a franchise business that we had, and I was also heavily involved in service clubs, like Apex and Rotary and things like that. So I was always sort of being in front of people. And this is sort of one of the strange things, I suppose, about me, in the sense that I consider myself an introvert, but in the end I was not a shy person. I just don't necessarily initiate a lot of things, but I did all my turn in the service clubs like Apex and Rotary, being on the committee and having my turn at being president. And a significant change came in '98. I was the incoming president of my Rotary Club, and about 100 people in the audience, and as I stood up to give the speech, and I'm in the dinner suit, my partner's there all lovely frocked up, and I had this sensation of only if they could see me, and it's not me standing there looking like this, but I felt like I was standing behind my own mask, and that in the end was the catalyst to start finally doing something, which didn't happen for a few years longer, but because the franchise business we had we were caught up in a shopping centre redevelopment, and business wasn't going really well, and so you got a lot of other things that you got to consider. So looking after this side of my life was really a low priority at the time because we had much more urgent things to consider. So that's how it sort of started.
So do you remember the first time you turned up to Seahorse, what it was like?
I do. I'd been, because we'd lost our business in '99, and from there we'd sort of had lots of jobs, and at this point I was working in northwest Victoria, ironically at a place called Rainbow. And I'd already had an interview with the secretary and somebody else as part of the process of joining Seahorse, and then through working I ended up northwest Victoria, and I finally get around to coming in May of 2002, and 4.5 hour drive to Melbourne. Plenty of opportunity to pull out. By this stage I had fairly long hair, but it was all salt and pepper grey, and I'd had some basic skirt and tops and things, but it was all in black. And I thought I'm a bit conscious of my recession, a little bit of recession I had, so I bought a beret to sort of try cover it up. And in hindsight, I called it my Edith Piaf look. But what I did do, I got a motel room in St Kilda and got changed there, and it no longer exists as a motel. I'm not sure what it is these days. So I drove all the way out to the venue and into the car park, and walked around the car park, and the room had a glass panel door. And my first reaction was, when I looked in there were people as badly dressed as I was. And in many ways that was quite comforting to sort of think, I'm not going to be standing out as an odd person.
Do you remember anything about the actual night itself?
Not a lot. I remember who was on the door at the time, and I met a person who's now been a very good friend for the last 20 or so years, and so I just sort of stood in the background and listened to what was going on and said hello to a few people here and there, and I really can't remember a lot of people from it or what happened on that night. It was sort of run a bit more formally than we run Seahorse these days.
How nervous were you getting into the car dressed as yourself for the first time?
I was quite nervous, but there's got to be an element if you've got to grin and bear it, and just hope the sky doesn't fall in and the ground doesn't open up. And once I got in the car and drove off, I was, because it was after dark at this point, and so that was quite easy to sort of handle. It was quite nerve-wracking to get out of the car at the car park and walk around to the room. But I thought, well, I've come all this way from northwest Victoria to get here on this night. I've just got to do it.
How happy were you the next day?
I was pretty happy. I was relieved. Pragmatism steps in a little bit and sort of think, that wasn't scary. That allowed me to then sort of put that sort of feeling into process of dealing with it over a longer period of time. So it was that pragmatism sort of kicked in again, well, that wasn't scary.
So you would drive 4.5 hours every month?
Yes.
For how long?
So that's 2002 until about early mid 2003, when I sort of got a job back in Melbourne.
Did you ever drive down dressed as Greer?
Not drive down dressed, but I did sort of drive back dressed.
Okay.
Because I knew I'd drive back in the home in the dark, and the car park at the block of flats that I was living at, drove up a little laneway, and then you got in and get into your flat without being necessarily seen by anyone.
Okay, so you started to turn up to Seahorse. Now I know you can't help but get involved in everything. So when did you take a position of responsibility in Seahorse?
Not long after, actually. In 2005 was the 30th anniversary of Seahorse, and in the lead up to that I put my hand up to help out doing some of the basic organising, sort of helping with the ticketing and things like that. So that was sort of within less than 12 months of really joining that I got involved in that. And that's partly because I was used to sort of being in a group that, because I was involved in the kids' sporting clubs and things like that. So groups work if somebody volunteers. So in 2005, I put my hand up to be president. So for 2005 and 6.
Did any member of your family know at this time?
Yes, at this stage I outed myself to the whole family. Particularly my kids, and that because my wife and I sort of separated. We still remain friends, but we'd separated, and that allowed for me to sort of explore this side of my life in more depth.
So how did your kids handle it?
Not too bad. A little bit of bemusement, I suppose, in some aspects. When I outed myself to my daughter first up, I think she sort of said, I was about to reveal this secret sort of thing. And it was the last thing she'd ever thought of as being what the secret may have been. Like she knew that, we'd been separated, and that, like everyone at some point, you drift apart for whatever reason. And, like what I did to explain to my kids at the time, because I tried to out myself, personally to each of them, but it got leaked to some of the others before I could sort of properly out myself. But I made a commitment that while I was making efforts to understand all this, that I went along to Seahorse as a way of exploring what it was in my life, that I wouldn't turn up to family functions or whenever I met them dressed. I'd be respectful of that aspect of dealing with the whole issue, because it's I worked out very early that jumping out from behind the tree and going to doesn't work.
So how did you handle it? Okay, you said you did not, with the family you presented as male. Did that affect you in any way, shape or form?
Not really. There was the aspect of trying to work out how to make my life work for me, because I still didn't understand where it was leading to, and sort of at that point I might jump back to, particularly the 90s, and even maybe the late 80s. My wife had tried to get me to seek counselling, and that's where I'd keep on gritting my teeth saying no, I can overcome this, thinking it was something that was overcomeable, to use such a word. But and the big question then was, well, how far is this going to go? And I had no answer to that. I just knew that I needed to be able to express myself in some fashion, and there was always the dressing in secret, and there's always little telltale signs that you were dressing in secret, and that creates tension. And one of the aspects I've found in having to deal with, particularly my wife, and where I was at, and that was, in some ways, if there is a regret, it's not making efforts to seek counselling and trying to work out what it is that I'm dealing with. And that was extremely unfair on her, and in a sense she's becomes a keeper of the secret, because there's always this, I suppose, worldly knowledge that this is not the done thing. And going back to all those years, and my refusal in a sense to acknowledge where it's leading or what it is, left it in an awkward state, which I sort of described in a conversation with my daughter, that in the end what it did was take my focus away from the relationship, because I was too focused on the secret within me, but working out how to deal as it was all becoming about me rather than how it fits in life.
Did you ever tell anyone at work?
Once I'd been at Seahorse and started to understand where it was, and that this was much more than just dressing part-time, this is likely to lead at some point to transitioning, I did then, by this stage I was working for a furniture retailer, and I did tell one of my work colleagues, because I'd already then committed's not the correct word, had decided that I am going to explore transitioning and what it means. And that's when I outed myself to a work colleague, and then when that particular business sort of went broke and had to go and find a new job sort of thing, I outed myself to another person at the business, and that was sort of quite a relief in many ways, to sort of start not transferring the burden to somebody else, but unburdening the sense of secrecy from myself.
How did they handle it, the people you told?
Quite well. When people see you as a decent person, and I think that's how I was always viewed, the challenges in my life are the challenges in my life. It's not something that's directly impacting on them. Well, my view is that they still had a sense that I'm still going to be basically the same person.
So when did you become Greer full-time, and that's it?
That's been a slow progress, because we'd lost our business at the end of the 90s. We lost all our money. I still needed work, and this is where pragmatism comes in. And while I did the 05, 06 as president, I stood back from that because I realised I needed to concentrate on getting work and then other things, and doing all those things that I suppose when you first come out you do. Besides going to Seahorse, you're going to the nightclub and pub and stuff in safe environments to learn how to be comfortable expressing yourself, and learning not to be self-conscious when somebody's talking to you. I'd come up with the name of Greer back in early 2001. At this stage we were living in Tasmania, and that's when I'd sort of really started to make genuine contact with other groups. That's when I first saw my first counsellor, things like that. And it wasn't until I got back to Melbourne in late 2001 that I was able to sort of start to deal with it a little bit more openly.
Okay, you're living your life as yourself. What would you say is the best thing that happened to you doing that?
Well, the best thing is not being afraid to be who you are. You know, it still presents problems in relationships and things because even though you still get on relatively friendly, there's, you know, why didn't you do this earlier? Why didn't you tell me earlier? And all those things, you know, because dealing with it earlier would have meant there were different solutions for other people to make up their mind about where to go and what to do. And the impact of keeping secrets makes on relationships is always problematic. And I think just being comfortable with not being afraid about where my life is. You know, like I lived a dual life for a long time, particularly when the business I worked for folded and I had to get another job, and I'm working in a warehouse in a fluoro shirt and steel cap boots. I talked about all the things I did, but not saying anything about that I wear dresses or wear makeup, even though I had my natural blonde hair. One of the things that I found was that I could talk about all those things, but it was about me making my life work for me. So if I had to work in steel cap boots and a fluoro shirt, that's what I had to do. You know, I talk about the things I did, and most people talk about the things they do, not about the clothes they wear, unless it's very specific to the conversation.
Now, one thing you said earlier when you started going out, you're going to safe places. When did you start going to mainstream places?
When I made the decision that I should enrol at Monash Gender Clinic to start the process of working out where I was, and one of the things that need to really do there was, well, if you're going to ultimately transition, then you're going to start getting out in the public. And so picked like the casino, for instance, to go there in a big mainstream way. They don't care as long as you're spending money and not misbehaving yourself. And then started to, you know, walk around the street to different things, go to a shopping centre. I worked out a little procedure I could keep myself from panicking, as it were, by going to shopping centres. Take a book with me. First thing you do is go to the coffee shop, get a cup of coffee, and try not to look too nervous, and then sit down and open the book up. And that way, knowing that people could look at me, because I was very much aware that if I had nothing to do and I'm sitting there with a cup of coffee in my hand going like this, that it'll make people feel uncomfortable. So it was about a dual purpose there of making me comfortable and getting brave enough to take the next step to go into a shop. And then it just slowly built from there.
I know my own experience with the shops are, as long as you're spending money, they don't really care about anything.
Yeah.
Then my final question then is, what advice, with everything you know now, would you give to your childhood self?
Yeah, it's very difficult to say because so much time has passed since my childhood and the circumstances of then. If it's in the modern era, and one of the things the internet has done is allowed children in particular to understand there's a solution to my problem, which there wasn't when I was younger. There was no solution to my problem. And because, but one of the things I think is learning to try to teach yourself not to be self-conscious about what other people think. Doesn't mean you have to be aggressively standoffish or towards somebody else, but just saying, oh, this is me, I'm not afraid to be me. And that easier said than done.
That's true. Thank you, Greer, for tonight. It's been very enjoyable and I've learned quite a bit. I'm Elisabeth Lane, Secretary of Seahorse, and thank you for watching tonight.